NBA, another one bites the dust. The Rockets, they going. Alex Kennedy, hoopshype.com. Let's get his take on what happened last night in Houston, Alex, where has anybody found James Harden at 5:33 on this evening here? Has anybody been able to find where he is?
I don't think so. Apparently, Calvin Watkins reported that he skipped exit interviews.
Oh, wow.
The Rockets, they said that they're giving him space. So I think that's something that bothers me more than his performance in the game last night. If you're a superstar player, and certainly James Harden wants to be viewed as the guy, an elite player in the NBA, then I think you have to be able to stand up and face the media at the end of the season, especially after you have a horrible game like he did last night. You have to hold yourself accountable, and instead of making all your teammates speak for you and answer the questions, skipping exit interviews and not talking to the press, in addition to disappearing last night, I think it's just the wrong move in my opinion. I think that's the last thing you want to do.
All right, Alex, we talked a lot in the first hour about, not saying this is going to happen, but do you think a performance like that and everything that's gone on and everything that the Rockets would pivot and say, does Daryl Morey say, hey, is this the guy we want to build around?
I don't think so. They're really confident that not only is James Harden the guy, but that he'll continue to improve. I interviewed Daryl Morey earlier this season, and he talked about James. He turned 27 this season, and Daryl said he's the hardest working player he's ever been around, whether it's as a GM or when he was with the Celtics as an assistant GM. He really believes in Harden, and he basically said that every single offseason, Harden has made a goal for himself to improve something. The first year it was improving his left hand, and he came into camp and his left hand was almost better than his right hand. Then it was improving his leadership, improving all these different things, and he's always met that goal. So I think, the fact that he was one of the maybe three best players in the NBA this season, it's hard to kind of pivot away from him and find a good direction to move in. And they built this team around him, too. The fact that this team and the core around him was basically built to help his game. He's a facilitator and a scorer surrounded by a ton of shooters. If you take him out of the equation, you're kind of left with a team that doesn't really have an identity. Kind of reminds me of the Thunder when Kevin Durant left. They built that team around Westbrook and Durant, and then Durant leaves, then suddenly you're left with Westbrook and a bunch of pieces that don't really fit together because they were brought in to play a certain role around a star, and then that star is gone. So I think that keeping Harden is certainly the right move. You want to see him play better in these games. He had started getting away from that reputation of disappearing in big games. Earlier in his career, he had that in the finals with the Thunder against the Miami Heat years ago. That whole series, he was just awful. So he's had that reputation for kind of disappearing in big moments, and I think he was trying to get away from that and, get people talking about something different. But certainly the narrative is right back there after last night.
No doubt about it. 39-point blowout loss. Their season ends. And then you look over to the Spurs. All right, everybody kind of thought this was the matchup, but does anybody think the Spurs could actually be competitive in this matchup?
I feel like the answer is no, but I have a really hard time betting against Greg Popovich. I thought Houston would win this series. When Tony Parker goes down, then Kawhi Leonard goes down, and you're talking about a Spurs team that already didn't have a ton of depth. You're talking about Jonathan Simmons in the starting lineup and Patty Mills in the starting lineup, which means, they're giving big minutes to Manu Ginobili at this stage of his career, and then young guys like Kyle Anderson and DeJounte Murray. So I felt like San Antonio could lose this series, and then sure enough, they rattle off, 2 wins without Parker and Kawhi. So I have a hard time betting against Pop. I think ultimately the Warriors are going to win. It's just a matter of how many games. The San Antonio team could put up a good fight against them. If LaMarcus Aldridge plays like he did, this past game where he had 34 points and 12 rebounds, if Jonathan Simmons keeps playing out of his mind and is shooting 8 of 12 from the field and, contributing all over the floor, then obviously, Kawhi Leonard should be back. It seems like he's going to, be back against the Warriors. Then the things I look at are San Antonio has a few different scorers. They have perimeter defenders, which is what you need against Golden State with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Kevin Durant. They have perimeter defenders when you talk about Patty Mills and Simmons and Kawhi Leonard. So they do have some pieces in a matchup that somewhat, intrigue me. But at the end of the day, Golden State's just such a good team. I think best case scenario for San Antonio, I would say they can push this thing to 6 games. I have a hard time, thinking they're going to win or thinking they're going to even push it to 7 games.
Talking with Alex Kennedy, NBA writer for HoopsHype.com, at Alex Kennedy NBA on Twitter. And tonight's game, funny, the way this NBA has gone, it's like the playoffs have gone, it's like we're going to give you the least compelling stuff we can, so you would anticipate a Boston blowout tonight, right? That's the way this thing's going. Boston blowout just to end this thing, because NBA playoffs, we don't want to give you a 7th game because you don't deserve good playoff basketball. But do you feel like this is just inevitable, going to go back to Boston?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. That's kind of how this postseason has gone, unfortunately. I do think this could go back to Boston. This Celtics team has been so up and down. It's really hard to predict one game to the next which Celtics team is going to show up. Is it going to be the one, that has Avery Bradley scoring almost 30 points and Isaiah Thomas chipping in and, everyone from Al Horford to Jay Crowder to Marcus Smart putting up big numbers and contributing all over the floor? Or is it going to be a team that kind of lays a dud? And Washington's kind of been the same way. You look at the Wizards and, last game John Wall didn't play that well. 21 points, 4 assists, two turnovers. That's not really, what they expect from him. That's a good game for most players, but for John Wall, they expect 30 and 10 at this point. So I think they need more from John Wall and Bradley Beal. I think Gortat needs to do a better job of dominating down low. I think we saw that in the Chicago series. The key to beating the Celtics is to have your big man scoring down low and getting offensive rebounds and, really dominating Boston's big men. So I do think that Washington can win tonight, and this game goes back to Boston for a Game 7. I hope that happens because, like you said, it would be intriguing. I always root for Game 7s. I think they're a lot of fun. I think it's very possible with the way these teams have played. And I don't think that, John Wall versus Isaiah Thomas is a bad matchup for Wall. There's been times in the series where he's been able to go off and have huge games. And Wall is one of those players who, unlike someone like James Harden that we're talking about right now, it seems like he steps up in big moments. He's had some really big games when his team really needed him the most. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him put up a big performance tonight.
And then, of course, the Game 7, which would be on Monday, right? Monday night would be a moment for Isaiah Thomas to step up. So you're right, watching a great performance, because hasn't this playoffs kind of been about performance over teams? Because we don't believe that any of these teams have a shot. We're just trying to gauge the performance and where we can characterize these stars of the league right now. That's kind of how I'm watching. Okay, who's John Wall? Who's Isaiah Thomas? Who's James Harden? These playoffs are trying to, give us a little bit more depth on that because we don't believe that any of these teams can really win.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially because so many of these guys are either coming up on free agency or are involved in trade talks or things like that. Like a guy like Kyle Lowry, for example, he's going to be a free agent after the season. So, throughout Toronto's playoff run, you're wondering, okay, what kind of player is this? Is he a guy that can really lead your team? There's been a number of cases like that. Chicago, Jimmy Butler. I think a lot of people thought Jimmy Butler could be traded. And then after his performance in the first round, I don't think there's any way Chicago is moving Butler. You kind of do look at it as from an individual standpoint. With the Spurs and LaMarcus Aldridge, the narrative all season long with Aldridge has been that he's washed up, he's not the same player, they shouldn't have signed him, blah, blah, blah. And then last night he has a monster game and helps them advance to the Western Conference Finals. So it really is about, individual matchups. This series has a really fun one with John Wall and Isaiah Thomas. Both of these guys are capable of putting up, 30, 35 points, or in Isaiah's case, 50 points in a series. I think Isaiah's really kind of had a coming out party during this postseason. A lot of people knew he was a good point guard. Boston fans knew what he was doing throughout the season, averaging 30 points. A lot of people felt like he should have been in that MVP conversation. And the same can be said for Wall. If you look at their statistics, they're right up there when you look at, their points and rebounds and assists and efficiency rating and defense and all that kind of stuff. They've had monster seasons as well. It's just the fact that Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, those guys were having such freakish seasons that guys like Wall and Thomas were kind of put on a next tier below them. So both of these guys have really been able to show what they can do on the biggest stage, and hopefully we see that again tonight and maybe in the Game 7.
Yeah, we'll see. Of course, that game right here on 97.3 ESPN. Spurs are big underdogs against the Warriors, according to Vegas. Mike D'Antoni today saying that James Harden might have to rest him more. We're going to see more of that probably. But real quick, before we let you run here, Alex, I want to get your take on something locally that's been kind of hot is Kyle Lowry. Some local Sixers beat guys here suggesting the Sixers could go hard, lucrative offers. Do you see Kyle Lowry as a fit for the Sixers? And is that a move that Brian Colangelo should pursue?
I'm not sure it's a move that he should pursue, but I do think it's a move that he might pursue. He wants to push this team further and get them to become a playoff squad. Clearly Kyle Lowry's from Philadelphia. He has a lot of pride in the area, and it would be a homecoming for him. So I understand, the narrative. They could offer him a ton of money. He'd have a chance to go, lead that team and really thrive in their backcourt. The thing that concerns me, and the reason I say that I wouldn't necessarily do it, is that he's going to be 32 years old next season. So, you're getting him on potentially the back end of his career, depending on how long the deal is. I know last summer Philadelphia made offers to Jamal Crawford. They made offers to Manu Ginobili. They made 1 year, $20 million offers, things like that. So if they're trying to go after him for, 1 year or something like that, they're not going to get him. He's going to get a max contract, a long-term deal from Toronto or another team. But if they offer him a 4-year deal, then I think that's concerning because he's going to be 36, 37 years old when that deal's up. And I'm not sure you want Kyle Lowry, at that stage in his career on the court or necessarily off the court. I'm not sure that Lowry is the best leader for a young locker room either. He's certainly matured and gotten better as a leader throughout his career, but he's not one of the top guys I think of when I think of leadership or guys that I'd want, in a locker room at, trying to really cultivate a winning culture. So I'm not sure he'd be the answer. I understand, why people are kind of connecting the two, but I wouldn't necessarily make that move.
All right, Alex Kennedy NBA on Twitter, of course, hoopshype.com as the NBA playoffs continue, and really good stuff that Alex is pumping out over there. Check out his piece on the Miami Heat. We were talking about the Heat earlier, and obviously the NBA playoffs haven't been great, but we're hoping to get an epic
We're just
final.
waiting for the last chapter.
Right, and
That's
maybe
all.
that will make it all worth it. Alex, we'll talk to you next week, pal.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.